The autumn sun painted golden streaks across the towering windows of the Boston Federal Courthouse. Natalie Harper stood outside courtroom 7, her navy dress pressed perfectly, her dark hair pulled back in a professional bun. She took 3 deep breaths, the way her mentor had taught her during law school. Today would determine everything for her client, and failure was not an option she could afford to consider. At 29 years old, Natalie had earned her reputation as the attorney who never gave up. She took cases that made other lawyers shake their heads and walk away. Her current client, Gabriela Torres, was a 34-year-old nurse from Mexico who had been wrongly accused of visa fraud by the massive healthcare corporation that employed her. The corporation wanted to avoid paying proper wages and benefits, so they had manufactured evidence to have Gabriela deported. But Natalie had spent 6 months digging through documents, finding witnesses, and building a defense that would expose their lies. The judge who changed everything. The bailiff called the court to order, and Natalie felt her stomach tighten with nervous energy. She had heard stories about Judge Vincent Cross. He was known throughout the legal community as brilliant but impossibly strict. Attorneys who came unprepared to his courtroom left humiliated. Those who tried to hide the truth found themselves facing contempt charges. He had been appointed to the federal bench 5 years ago at the unusually young age of 32, and his rulings had already shaped important legal precedents. When Vincent entered the courtroom, Natalie forgot to breathe for a moment. He was nothing like she had imagined. Tall and lean, with dark brown hair that showed distinguished gray at the temples, he moved with quiet confidence that commanded respect without demanding it. His eyes were an unusual shade of green that seemed to see everything at once. He wore his judicial robe with the ease of someone comfortable with power, yet his face held a sadness that spoke of personal pain. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and Natalie felt something shift inside her chest. It was like recognizing someone she had never met before, a connection that defied logic and professional boundaries. Vincent's expression remained neutral, but she saw his hand pause briefly as he settled into his chair. The moment lasted only seconds, but it changed everything. The battle begins. Natalie forced herself to focus as the prosecution began their opening statements. Richard Donovan, the lead attorney for the healthcare corporation, was everything she despised about the legal profession. Smooth, polished, and completely unconcerned with truth or justice. He painted Gabriela as a criminal who had lied to enter the country, who had stolen opportunities from honest workers, who deserved to be punished to the full extent of the law. When Natalie stood to present her defense, she felt Vincent's attention focus on her completely. Unlike other judges who seemed to be thinking about their next case or checking the clock, he leaned forward slightly, his green eyes tracking her every movement. She laid out her evidence methodically. The altered documents that proved the corporation had changed employment records after hiring Gabriela. The testimony from former employees who had been threatened into silence. The pattern of the corporation targeting immigrant workers to exploit their labor and then discarding them when convenient. As she spoke, Natalie's passion for justice burned through her carefully practiced professional demeanor. She talked about Gabriela's children who would lose their mother. She described the nights Gabriela had worked double shifts, saving lives as a nurse, while the corporation counted its profits. She exposed the system that allowed powerful entities to destroy vulnerable people without consequence. A dangerous attraction. When the morning session ended, Vincent called for a recess. Natalie gathered her papers, her hands trembling slightly from adrenaline. She told herself it was just the stress of the case, but she knew better. Every time Vincent had looked at her during her presentation, she had felt heat spread through her body. Every time he had asked a question, his deep voice had sent shivers down her spine. "Miss Harper, please join me in chambers for a moment." His voice cut through her thoughts, and Natalie looked up to find Vincent standing at the door to his private office. Her heart began to race. Private meetings with judges were not unusual, but something about the intensity in his eyes made this feel different. Dangerous. She followed him into chambers, noting the walls lined with leather-bound legal texts, the massive oak desk covered with case files, and the faint scent of coffee mixed with something else, something masculine that made her pulse quicken. Vincent closed the door behind them, and suddenly the room felt much smaller. Crossing lines, Vincent moved to stand by the window, his back to her for a long moment. When he turned, the professional mask had slipped slightly. His eyes held an emotion that Natalie recognized because she felt it too. Desire mixed with fear. "Want battling against duty. Your presentation this morning was exceptional," he said quietly. "Your research is thorough, your arguments are sound, and your passion for your client is evident." "Thank you, Your Honor," Natalie managed, though her voice sounded breathless even to her own ears. "Please call me Vincent when we're alone." He took a step closer, and Natalie caught her breath. "I want you to know that I'm approving all of your evidence requests. Every single one, including the financial records from the corporate executive suite." Natalie's eyes widened in shock. Those records were exactly what she needed to prove the conspiracy, but she had expected weeks of legal battles to obtain them. All of them? Even the executive communications? Especially those? Vincent's jaw tightened. If your client is innocent, she deserves every tool available to prove it. If the corporation is guilty of what you're suggesting, they need to face consequences. The moment everything changed, Natalie should have thanked him and left immediately. She should have maintained professional distance and pretended the electricity between them did not exist. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Why are you telling me this privately?" "You could have issued a written ruling." Vincent's green eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Because I wanted you to know that I see what you're doing. I see how hard you're fighting for someone who has nothing. And I wanted to meet the woman who reminded me why I became a judge in the first place." The air between them felt charged with possibility and danger. Natalie knew she should step back, should remember all the ethical rules they were breaking just by standing this close. But her feet would not move. Her body swayed slightly toward him as if pulled by gravity. "This can't happen," she whispered, though her words lacked conviction. "I know," Vincent replied, his hand lifting as though to touch her face before he forced it back down. "But that doesn't change the fact that when I look at you, I see everything I've been missing. Everything I thought I had given up when I took this position." Before Natalie could respond, a knock on the door shattered the moment. Vincent's expression closed immediately, the professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "Enter," he called, his voice neutral once more. His clerk appeared with urgent papers requiring his signature. Natalie used the interruption to gather her composure and her briefcase. As she moved toward the door, Vincent's voice stopped her. "Miss Harper, be careful. The corporation you're fighting has powerful connections. Watch your back, and don't trust anyone who seems too helpful." The warning in his tone sent a chill down her spine, but it was the concern in his eyes that made her heart ache. She nodded once and left, knowing that everything between them had changed in those few charged moments. The case had become more than just about justice for Gabriela. It had become about something neither of them could name yet, something that felt inevitable and terrifying in equal measure. 3 days passed since that charged moment in Vincent's chambers, and Natalie could not stop thinking about him. She spent her nights reviewing the approved evidence, surrounded by stacks of documents in her small apartment. The corporate financial records revealed a pattern even more disturbing than she had imagined. Gabriela was not the first immigrant worker the corporation had targeted. Over the past decade, at least 20 others had been accused of fraud, deported, and silenced before they could fight back. But something else caught her attention. Hidden in the executive communications was a name she recognized. Thomas Mercer, senior partner at Mercer & Associates, the law firm representing the corporation. The same Thomas Mercer who had been Vincent's law partner 15 years ago, before Vincent became a judge. The connection made her stomach turn cold with dread. Natalie picked up her phone 3 times before finally calling the number Vincent had given her for urgent case matters. He answered on the second ring, his voice tense. "Natalie, what's wrong?" Hearing him use her first name sent warmth through her chest, despite her anxiety. "I need to see you." "Not at the courthouse?" "I found something in the evidence that you need to know about." A long pause. "My home address is 847 Maple Grove. Come tonight at 8. Use the back entrance through the garden." Secrets in the Garden. Vincent's home was a beautiful 2-story colonial house in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by mature trees that provided privacy from curious neighbors. Natalie parked 2 blocks away and walked through the shadows, her heart pounding. She knew meeting him like this crossed every ethical boundary, but the information she had discovered was too important to wait. The garden gate opened silently, and she found Vincent waiting on the back porch. He wore jeans and a dark sweater, looking more approachable than she had ever seen him. But his eyes held worry that made her chest tighten. "Come inside quickly," he said, guiding her through the door with a hand on her lower back. The brief touch sent electricity through her entire body. His home was warm and inviting, filled with books and comfortable furniture. Photographs lined the mantel, showing Vincent with a woman who looked like him but softer, more delicate. Natalie recognized the sadness in those images, the shadow of loss that explained the pain she always saw in his eyes. "That's my sister, Claire," Vincent said quietly, following her gaze. "She died 7 years ago because of people like the ones you're fighting now." The truth about Claire. They sat in his living room, coffee growing cold between them as Vincent told her everything. His voice was steady, but his hands clenched with remembered pain. 15 years ago, I was a different person. Ambitious, ruthless, willing to do whatever it took to win cases. Thomas Mercer recruited me right out of law school. His firm represented the biggest corporations, the wealthiest clients, and we won by any means necessary. Buried evidence, intimidated witnesses, exploited every loophole in the system. Natalie listened, her heart breaking for the man he had been and the man he had become. Claire was a social worker. She discovered that one of our clients, a pharmaceutical company, was testing experimental drugs on low-income patients without proper consent. Immigrants, homeless people, anyone who wouldn't be believed if they complained. She came to me with evidence, begging me to help her expose them. Vincent stood and walked to the window, his back rigid with tension. I took her information to Thomas. I thought he would help me do the right thing. Instead, he told the pharmaceutical company. They manufactured evidence against Claire, accused her of stealing patient records and falsifying reports. Thomas used his connections to make sure she was prosecuted to the fullest extent. "What happened to her?" Natalie whispered, though she already knew the answer would break her heart. She spent 3 years in prison. By the time new evidence cleared her name, her health had deteriorated from the stress. She had lost her job, her reputation, her will to fight. She died 6 months after her release from a heart condition that developed during her incarceration. A dangerous connection tears streamed down Natalie's face as she stood and moved to Vincent. Without thinking, she placed her hand on his back, feeling the tension in his muscles. He turned, and the raw grief in his eyes made her want to hold him and never let go. "That's why you became a judge," she said softly. "To stop people like Thomas from destroying innocent lives. I swore I would use whatever power I had to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, to make sure the system worked the way it was supposed to, not the way it benefited the powerful." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "And then you walked into my courtroom fighting for Gabriela with the same fire Claire once had. I knew I couldn't let you fight alone." The space between them disappeared. Natalie knew she should pull away, should remember all the reasons this was wrong. But when Vincent's lips met hers, gentle and desperate at the same time, nothing else mattered. The kiss tasted like coffee and longing, like years of loneliness finally finding an end. They pulled apart slowly, both breathing hard. Vincent rested his forehead against hers, his hands trembling slightly as they framed her face. "This is dangerous," he whispered. "For both of us. For your case." "I know," Natalie replied, her hands fisting in his sweater. "But I also know that what I feel for you is real. More real than anything I've felt in my entire life." The conspiracy deepens. They spent the next hour reviewing the evidence Natalie had brought. The connection between Thomas Mercer and the healthcare corporation went deeper than either had imagined. Mercer had been systematically targeting immigrant workers across multiple companies, creating a pipeline of cheap, exploitable labor that could be discarded whenever convenient. The profits were staggering and the victims had no voice to fight back. "There's more," Natalie said, pulling out another document. "I found sealed court records from a case 10 years ago. It mentions you, Thomas, and someone named Richard Donovan. Vincent's face went pale. How did you access sealed records? I have a friend who's a court clerk. She shouldn't have shown me, but she did. Natalie watched his reaction carefully. Vincent, what happened 10 years ago? He was silent for a long moment, struggling with something internal. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Richard Donovan was Thomas's protege, just like I had been. We worked together on a case defending a corporation accused of labor violations. We knew they were guilty. We had evidence proving they had knowingly endangered workers, falsified safety reports, and bribed inspectors. People had died because of their negligence. What did you do? Natalie asked, though dread was already pooling in her stomach. Thomas ordered us to bury the evidence and discredit the victims' families. Richard followed orders without question, but I couldn't do it anymore. Not after what had happened to Claire. Vincent's hands clenched into fists. I turned whistleblower. I took all the evidence to the authorities and testified against Thomas and the corporation. The price of justice. Natalie's mind raced with implications. That's why you left the firm, why you became a judge. The corporation was found guilty and several executives went to prison. But Thomas was too smart. He had insulated himself from direct involvement. He lost his partnership but kept his law license. He rebuilt his firm and Richard stayed with him. They've been operating the same way ever since, just more carefully. And now they're prosecuting Gabriela, Natalie said, understanding flooding through her. This isn't just about one immigrant worker. This is Thomas getting revenge on you by destroying someone you're trying to protect. Vincent nodded slowly. If he finds out about us, about what we feel for each other, he'll use it to discredit the case. He'll claim bias, demand a mistrial, and Gabriela will lose her chance at justice. The weight of their situation crashed down on Natalie. Every moment they spent together put Gabriela at risk. Every touch, every kiss, every stolen glance in the courtroom was a weapon Thomas could use against them. I should go, she said, standing abruptly. We can't do this. Not while the case is ongoing. Vincent caught her hand, pulling her back. Wait, please. A choice between love and duty. They stood facing each other, hands clasped, hearts breaking. Natalie could see the same conflict in Vincent's eyes that was tearing her apart. The choice between duty and desire, between doing what was right and following what felt inevitable. I'm going to recuse myself from the case, Vincent said firmly. Judge Patricia Morrison will take over. She's fair and thorough. Your evidence will stand, and Gabriela will get the trial she deserves. You don't have to sacrifice your involvement in the case because of me, Natalie protested. Yes, I do. Vincent pulled her closer, his green eyes burning with intensity. Because what I feel for you isn't something I can hide or ignore. Every time you stand in my courtroom, I can't think about anything except how brave you are, how passionate, how beautiful. I can't be impartial when all I want is to protect you and support you and be with you. Natalie's breath caught. Vincent, we barely know each other. I know enough. His hand came up to cradle her face again. I know that you fight for people who have no one else. I know that you believe in justice even when the system is stacked against you. I know that when I look at you, I see the person I want to be, the person Claire believed I could become. Tears filled Natalie's eyes again. If we do this, if we let ourselves feel this, there's no going back. Thomas will find out eventually. He'll destroy both our careers. Then we'll face that together. Vincent's thumb traced her lower lip, sending shivers through her entire body. But I won't let you face him alone. I won't make the same mistake I made with Claire. Their second kiss was deeper, more desperate. It tasted like forbidden love and dangerous choices, like two people jumping off a cliff together without knowing if they could fly. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, both knowing that everything had changed. The storm approaching Natalie left Vincent's house near midnight, her lips still tingling from his kisses, her heart full of emotions she could barely name. She knew they were playing with fire. She knew that loving Vincent Cross was the most dangerous choice she could make. But as she drove home through the empty streets, she also knew that some things were worth any risk. What neither of them realized was that someone had been watching. A car parked 3 houses down had captured photographs of Natalie entering Vincent's home through the garden gate. The pictures were already on their way to Thomas Mercer's private email, along with a message that would change everything. The storm was coming, and it would test whether their love was strong enough to survive the forces determined to destroy them both. Morning light barely touched the horizon when Natalie's phone exploded with calls. She woke from restless sleep, her mind still filled with memories of Vincent's touch, his whispered promises, the way he had looked at her like she was his entire world. The first call was from her law partner, Miguel Santos, his voice tight with panic. "Natalie, you need to see the news. Right now." She fumbled for her laptop, her heart already sinking with dread. The local legal news website had a headline that made her blood run cold. Federal judge's secret affair threatens high-profile immigration case. Below it was a photograph of her entering Vincent's home through the garden gate, time-stamped from the previous night. The article was brutal. It questioned Vincent's impartiality, suggested corruption, and painted their relationship as a conspiracy to manipulate the justice system. Quotes from anonymous sources claimed Vincent had been showing favoritism toward Natalie's cases for months. The piece was clearly written by someone with inside knowledge of the legal community, someone with an axe to grind. Thomas Mercer had made his move. The price of love, Natalie's phone rang again. This time it was Vincent, his voice strained but controlled. "I've seen it. Don't say anything to anyone. I'm calling an emergency ethics hearing for this afternoon. Meet me at the courthouse at 2. Vincent, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should never have come to your house. Stop." His voice was firm but gentle. "This isn't your fault. Thomas has been planning this from the moment he recognized my involvement in the case. He was just waiting for an opportunity. We gave him one, but that doesn't make you responsible for his actions." After they hung up, Natalie sat in stunned silence. Her career, Vincent's position, and worst of all, Gabriela's case hung in the balance. Everything they had worked for could be destroyed by one photograph and the malicious intent of a man seeking revenge. The ethics hearing, emergency hearing, took place in a small conference room at the courthouse, presided over by 3 senior judges. Vincent sat on one side, his expression calm but his eyes betraying the storm inside. Natalie sat across from him, forcing herself not to look at him too often, knowing every glance would be scrutinized. Thomas Mercer attended as the complainant, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit immaculate. He wore an expression of concerned righteousness that made Natalie want to scream. Richard Donovan sat beside him, taking notes with a slight smile on his face. "Judge Cross," began Judge Morrison, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness. "These are serious allegations. A photograph places Attorney Harper at your private residence late at night during an active case. How do you explain this?" Vincent stood, his voice steady and clear. "I don't deny that Attorney Harper came to my home. She had discovered evidence of a conspiracy involving my former law partner, Thomas Mercer, and felt it was urgent enough to discuss privately. I should have insisted the meeting take place elsewhere, and for that error in judgment, I take full responsibility. The evidence she brought concerned me personally," Vincent continued. "It revealed connections between the opposing counsel and my past that created a conflict of interest. That's why I recused myself from the case 3 days ago before this photograph was taken." Judge Morrison's eyebrow raised. "You recused yourself before the relationship became public knowledge?" "I recused myself because I recognized that my personal feelings for Attorney Harper were affecting my ability to remain impartial. I informed my clerk and submitted the paperwork the morning after our conversation." "You can verify the timestamps." Truth as a weapon, Thomas Mercer stood, his voice dripping with false concern. "Your Honor, Judge Cross's admission only confirms the impropriety. He's confessed to having romantic feelings for an attorney appearing before him. This calls into question every ruling he made in this case and potentially dozens of others." "Mr. Mercer," Judge Morrison said coldly, "I find it interesting that you're so concerned about judicial ethics given your own history. I've reviewed the sealed records from the case 10 years ago. The one where Judge Cross, then an attorney, turned whistleblower against your firm." Thomas's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "That case has no bearing on this matter. On the contrary, it has every bearing." Judge Morrison looked at Vincent. Judge Cross, please tell us about your sister Claire. Vincent's jaw clenched, but he spoke clearly. My sister was destroyed by the corrupt system that Mr. Mercer represents. She tried to expose pharmaceutical company abuses, and she was framed, prosecuted, and imprisoned. She died because the system failed her. I became a judge to make sure that never happened to anyone else. He turned to face Thomas directly, his green eyes blazing with controlled fury. When Attorney Harper came to my courtroom defending Gabriela Torres, I saw my sister's fight happening again. I saw Mr. Mercer using the same tactics, the same playbook to destroy another innocent person. Yes, I developed feelings for Attorney Harper, but those feelings didn't compromise my judgment. They reminded me why justice matters more than procedure. The conspiracy revealed Natalie stood, her voice clear despite her racing heart. Your Honors, I have additional evidence that was delivered to my office this morning. She pulled out a thick folder, her hands steady even as her pulse pounded. Detective Laura Chen has been investigating the Healthcare Corporation for immigration fraud. Her findings show that Thomas Mercer's law firm has been systematically targeting immigrant workers across 15 different companies over the past decade. They create false evidence, intimidate witnesses, and use their legal connections to ensure quick deportations. She laid out documents, emails, financial records. Gabriela Torres is just one victim in a pattern of organized exploitation. Mr. Mercer knew that Judge Cross would recognize these tactics because he had witnessed them before. That's why he took this case personally. He wanted revenge on the man who had exposed him once before. Thomas stood abruptly. These accusations are outrageous and unfounded, are they? Detective Laura Chen entered the room, her badge visible. Mr. Mercer, I have warrants for your arrest and for Richard Donovan on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and witness intimidation. Your firm's financial records show payments to immigration officials, falsified documents, and a pattern of criminal behavior spanning years. The room erupted in chaos. Thomas's face went pale as security officers moved toward him. Richard tried to bolt, but was stopped at the door. As they were led away in handcuffs, Thomas shot Vincent a look of pure hatred. This isn't over, Cross. You've destroyed my career for the second time. Vincent's voice was cold as steel. No, Thomas. You destroyed your own career by forgetting what justice actually means. I just made sure you faced consequences this time. After Thomas and Richard were removed, Judge Morrison turned to Vincent and Natalie. Her expression was stern, but not unkind. Judge Cross, while your actions were ethically questionable, they ultimately led to the exposure of serious criminal activity. However, you cannot continue presiding over cases involving Attorney Harper. Your recusal was appropriate and will remain in effect. She looked at Natalie. Attorney Harper, your dedication to your client is commendable. However, you must understand that relationships with judges create the appearance of impropriety, even when no actual corruption exists. Be more careful in the future. Yes, Your Honor, Natalie said quietly. That being said, Judge Morrison continued, a slight smile touching her lips. Judge Cross is no longer assigned to the Torres case. What you do in your personal lives outside the courtroom is your own business. Just keep it far away from my courthouse. New beginnings. 3 months later, Gabriela Torres stood outside the courthouse, her children beside her, tears of joy streaming down her face. Judge Morrison had dismissed all charges after the evidence of conspiracy was revealed. Gabriela's visa was secured, her job restored, and the Healthcare Corporation faced massive fines and federal investigation. Natalie stood with her client, feeling the weight of months of struggle finally lift. She had won. Not just for Gabriela, but for all the silent victims Thomas Mercer had destroyed over the years. Thank you, Gabriela said, hugging Natalie tightly. You saved my family. You gave us our life back. You fought for yourself, Natalie replied, her own eyes wet. I just made sure people heard your voice. As Gabriela and her children left to celebrate, Natalie felt a familiar presence behind her. She turned to find Vincent standing on the courthouse steps, no longer in his judicial robes, but in a simple suit. He had resigned from the bench 2 weeks ago, citing personal reasons. The legal community had been shocked, but those who knew the truth understood. Some sacrifices were necessary for love. love without boundaries. They walked together to a small park near the courthouse, the autumn leaves falling around them in shades of gold and crimson. Vincent took her hand, and the simple touch still sent electricity through her entire body. "No regrets?" she asked softly. "Not one." Vincent stopped and turned to face her, his green eyes clear and certain. "I spent years hiding behind the bench, using my position as armor against feeling anything real. You reminded me what it means to fight for something, to risk everything for what matters." "You gave up your career for me," Natalie whispered. "No." Vincent cupped her face in his hands, the gesture achingly familiar now. "I gave up a job, but I gained something infinitely more valuable. I gained you, and I gained myself back, the person Claire always believed I could be." He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Natalie's breath caught. "It's too soon for what you're thinking," he said with a slight smile. "But it's a promise that whatever comes next, we face it together. No more secrets, no more hiding, just us against the world." Inside the box was a simple silver ring with an inscription: Justice, Love, Truth. Natalie's tears fell freely as Vincent slipped it onto her right hand. "The three things worth fighting for," she said. "The three things we found together," he replied. Epilogue. A year later. Natalie opened her own law firm specializing in immigration and workers' rights. Her first partner was Vincent Cross, former federal judge, now dedicated to defending the vulnerable from positions of power. Together, they took on cases that others refused, fought battles that seemed impossible, and won more often than they lost. Detective Laura Chen joined their team as a private investigator, her skills invaluable in uncovering corporate corruption. Gabriela Torres volunteered at their office, helping other immigrants navigate the legal system and offering hope to those who thought they had none. The legal community talked about them, some with admiration, others with disapproval. But Natalie and Vincent didn't care about reputation anymore. They had learned that real justice existed outside courtrooms and professional accolades. It lived in the faces of clients like Gabriela who got to keep their families. It breathed in the spaces between laws where humanity and compassion dwelled. On a crisp October evening, exactly 1 year after they first met, Vincent took Natalie back to that same park where he had given her the promise ring. This time, he knelt on one knee with a different box, asking the question she had been waiting for. "Natalie Harper, will you marry me? Will you continue this crazy, dangerous, beautiful fight for justice with me for the rest of our lives?" She pulled him to his feet and kissed him with all the passion and love that had been building since that first moment. In the courtroom, when their eyes met and everything changed. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes to everything." The promise. Fulfilled. Their wedding was small, held in the garden of Vincent's home where their forbidden love had first taken root. Gabriela and her children attended, along with Detective Chen, Judge Morrison, and dozens of clients whose lives they had changed. Claire's photograph sat in a place of honor, her gentle smile blessing the union, as Natalie and Vincent exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other, to fight for justice together, to never let fear stop them from doing what was right. They knew their story was just beginning. They had proven that some loves were worth breaking rules for. Some connections defied professional boundaries and social expectations. Some promises were more important than careers or reputations. Vincent had promised to follow the law, but love had dragged him into a dangerous secret. And that secret had set them both free to become the people they were always meant to be. Together they would continue changing lives, fighting corruption and proving that justice and love could exist in the same breath, the same moment, the same beautiful, imperfect world. Their story became a legend in legal circles. The judge who gave up everything for love and justice, the attorney who refused to compromise her values, the couple who proved that doing the right thing, even when it cost everything, was always worth it in the end. And somewhere, in whatever place souls rest after life, Claire Cross smiled. Her brother had finally found the peace and purpose she always knew he deserved. He had found someone who understood that justice without love was just procedure, but love with justice could change the world. The end.